In their epic quest to seem fiscally responsible without actually being fiscally responsible, this year's Republicans have come up with a genius move. They voted today to voluntarily restrict themselves from identifying specific targets for funding in their districts in spending bills. This practice is usually nicknamed earmarking. Contrary to the common wisdom, it does not increase the amount of money that is spent by the federal government. It does not add to the deficit. It is just a means of directing money that's already slated to be spent, directing it to specific projects. Even if you got rid of all the dollars that are earmarked, that are being directed to specific projects, you wouldn't make a dent in total spending, right? I mean, overall, really, it doesn't even register. Of the $3.5 trillion federal budget, sounds like a lot, but it's a big country, about $16 billion is found in earmarks. That is less than 0.5%. That is a dot on a freckle. That is a quark in an atom. That is a tiny line in a pie chart that doesn't even look like a slice. That's our best approximation of it. So restricting earmarks does not really reduce spending, but Republicans sure make it sound like it does.
The abuse of this practice has caused Americans to view it as a symbol of the waste and out-of-control spending that every Republican in Washington is determined to fight.
Symbol being the operative word there. That's Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who was speaking yesterday. And what you see scrolling by here on the screen right now, these are just some of the $927 million in earmarks that he personally has secured for his home state, according to the website Legistorm, which tracks these things. And this isn't even counting the ones that he had co-sponsors for. And this list is only for stuff that he has earmarked since 2008. Public buses and a Gunpowder Creek trail system, a wildlife refuge, defense projects. It's all very neat. But remember, Senator Mitch McConnell opposes these things that he has secured $927 million of. At least now he says he opposes them. Now he says he opposes them in the name of trying to seem fiscally conservative while actually not doing anything to be fiscally conservative. The earmarks issue has nothing to do with spending or the deficit. These issues are not related. But they have made it sound like these issues are related. And when you make a policy based on what something sounds like rather than what it actually is, you get moments of pure genius in American politics like this one. Republican Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota, who has been one of the loudest voices on the right denouncing earmarks. She is also a congresswoman who has secured millions of dollars of earmarks for her own district. Confronted with this awkwardness by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune this week, Ms. Bachmann seemed to realize that that really did sound bad, to be inveighing publicly against earmarks, all the while securing millions of dollars worth of earmarks. To fix that problem, Michelle Bachmann has proposed this amazing solution. She has proposed redefinition, telling the Star-Tribune she supports a redefinition of what an earmark is. Because the Congresswoman had asked for and received multiple transportation earmarks for her district, she now says, quote, advocating for transportation projects for one's district, in my mind, does not equate to an earmark. Yes, it does, regardless of what's in your mind. When you make policy based on what things sound like rather than what they are, you are inviting people to just start pronouncing things differently in order to say that they have changed. Joining us now is John Stanton, staff writer for Roll Call newspaper in Washington. Mr. Stanton, it's nice to see you. Thanks very much for your time.
It's good to be here.
Senate Republicans voted to ban the practice of earmarks today, but they weren't voting on that legally. This wasn't legislation. What exactly did they do?
No, what they voted on was a voluntary moratorium on earmarks without actually a recorded vote, so you don't technically know how everybody in the conference was voting. We know some of the folks, Jim DeMint, for instance, obviously has supported it. He's the guy that was behind it. But then you have guys like Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma, who is a very big earmarker, very big proponent of earmarking, and he's essentially already said he won't abide by the voluntary ban. So it's really more sort of like Senator McConnell said in his floor speech, a way for the Republicans to at least try to show that they're being serious about paying attention to what Tea Partiers and others said in the election.
So it's sort of a symbolic resolution, but they obviously think the symbolism on this is important. I know the House isn't expected to vote on their version of the earmark ban until January, but didn't House Republicans already try something like this before?
Well, they did. This year they actually had a ban on earmarks, and they didn't request them, generally speaking. However, this year was a little easy for them to do it because they knew that the appropriations bills weren't going to actually be passed. It was an election year. The atmosphere, as everyone remembers, was very toxic. So they knew that it was a sort of an easy choice for them to make. Democrats did a sort of a similar thing in the House where it was weaker than what Republicans did, but they were also able to do it because they knew that there were going to be no actual votes on earmarks or appropriations bills. So it was much easier for them to do it. Now I think they're going to try to do it again this coming year, and we'll see sort of how folks like Congressman Bachmann sort of deal with finding a way to get around some of the rules or find creative ways to interpret them.
The reason this seems like such a big, important story to me is because there's been all this clamor throughout this whole election season, and since the election in particular, about getting serious about reducing spending and attacking the deficit. And the first thing that they have done is something that is substantively utterly meaningless. Substantively, we won't actually do anything to the deficit at all and won't really do anything to spending at all. And that's why Michelle Bachmann, who's somebody who I don't generally go out of my way to quote, her remarks on this seem just sort of like they are a microcosm of all of this. She says that she would like to consider transportation districts that she names for her own district. She just doesn't want to call those earmarks anymore. Does she have a case to make? Isn't that a classic definition of an earmark?
Well, it is. In fact, that's exactly what almost all earmarks are. People have sort of created this idea in their head of all earmarks are sort of the bridge to nowhere, or the Coconut Grove earmark in Florida from a few years ago, sort of sketchy looking earmarks that may or may not be justified, that may or may not be tied to some kind of corruption. And people, it has become tied to things like that. And in people's minds, earmarks have sort of become a bad word. And for reasons I think that of political expediency, Republicans have also tied earmarks to the broader issue of spending and debt. And, as you say, it doesn't have much of an effect on spending. Even if you were to actually eliminate all the funding that were in the earmarks, it would do virtually nothing to bring down the debt.
I couldn't have said it more clearly myself, which is why I wanted you to say it, because you make a lot more sense than I do. Roll calls, John Stanton. It is always a real pleasure to have you on the show, John. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.